Welcome to the Daily Dawg podcast. Today is Tuesday, November 11th, and this is episode 44 of the Daily Dawg podcast. Today we are in our Week 12 coverage of the 2025 Georgia football season, and that means that the big game against Texas, our last SEC regular season game of the year, is coming up on Saturday in Sanford Stadium. It's going to be a big matchup between number 5 and number 10 in the current AP rankings. We don't have the most recent college football playoff rankings out yet. Those will be revealed tonight. It's Tuesday night, so those will come out tonight. So we're going to do a little bit of a preview show and just a little discussion about SEC championship and rankings today before we jump in tomorrow and the next day and the next day talking about and breaking down this game against Texas. So I think first and foremost, let me talk a little bit about the college football playoff rankings. We talked about them a little bit last week, and but not too much. And so I think, first and foremost, let's say where we are leading into. So I'm going to tell you what I think my rankings are. I'm going to tell you my thinking about the college football playoff in general. A couple topics I guess we have is just sort of a general playoff discussion, college football playoff rankings, SEC championship, and what do we want as Georgia fans? What should we be hoping for? Do we want to win the SEC championship? Do we want to play in the SEC championship game? I mean, frankly, the way I've been raised as a Bulldog fan over the last 35 years that I have been sharing and talking with you guys about, I am kind of shocked and dismayed to hear myself asking that question and saying, do we really want to play in the SEC championship game? Do we want to win the SEC championship? Last year, one set of data in 1 year is too small a sample size to judge anything for sure, right? But the playing in the SEC championship game in the first weekend of December and then not playing in a playoff game until, as it turned out to be, January 2nd. It was supposed to be January 1st, but it turned out to be January 2nd because of the delay, unfortunately, because of the incident that happened in New Orleans around the Sugar Bowl, since we were in the Sugar Bowl. But and I have a funny story about that too, but I'll share that with you in a little bit. The not funny story about the tragic incident around the Sugar Bowl, but a funny story about what I was going to be doing relative to the game. Anyway, but the net result is all four of the four seeded teams, which in most cases were the conference champions. They were the teams that played in their conference championship games and won. All four of those teams ended up, when they went through that bye and waiting all the way till January, from the first week of December all the way, or championship week, as we tend to call it, the first week of December, everybody plays their championship games now. The SEC led and started that tradition, being the first team to the first conference to generate an SEC championship game. But once that came about, now everybody plays championship week on that first week in December. And then having to go all the way to the first week of January without playing, that 4-week layoff, maybe that was a bad thing. It's hard to say. All four teams lost. Now, there's some different things to look at in those four teams. You had Boise State. Maybe Boise State wasn't really worthy to begin with. You had Arizona State. They were the Big 12 champion. They turned out to be a good team, and they gave Texas all they could handle in that first game, that first playoff game for Arizona State. It was Texas's second game, having played in the SEC championship game. So I guess, there's an interesting part of this discussion. Texas played Georgia in the SEC championship game, obviously lost in the overtime thriller, ended up with a home game against Clemson in the first round of playoffs, won that game, advanced to the quarterfinal game, and then when they got to the quarterfinal game and against the seeded Arizona State team that had to bye. That was a back and forth game. And frankly, Arizona State probably could have and should have won that game. Texas was lucky to pull that out as a one-score game at the end and advance to play Ohio State, who beat them pretty thoroughly. Although actually that was a close game too. The final score was a 2-score game, but it was a close game or a tied game going into the third quarter, the Texas-Ohio State game. So probably the toughest or closest game Ohio State had in their playoff run last year was their game against Texas. So, and then of course you had Georgia. We had the bye. We won the SEC championship. We had the almost 4 weeks off, and then we played Notre Dame, who had a home game against Indiana first, won that game, and then advanced to play Georgia. played us in the Sugar Bowl. They won that game and then went on to play. They beat Penn State, I believe, and then moved on to play Ohio State in the championship game, and then ultimately lost the championship game. So all four of the teams that had home playoff games the first week of the playoff, which began that third week of December, it was around December, last year was around December 20th, 21st. All four of those home teams won their games, advanced to the next round of games, and won those games. And all four of the teams that had the bye and had won their conference championship games, all four of those teams ended up losing. And they had a little bit longer layoff. And I will say that I think just looking at it, I don't know if, look, we can't, from one season of data, we can't determine anything. We can't say that's determinative, that's definitely what is going to happen or did happen. But I think we can look at that and say, and I'll just say this, as a sports fan in general, of course, I'm a baseball fan. I've told you that, big Braves fan. And certainly the couple years that the Braves had won the division and then had the bye in the new format of the playoffs, they also lost those series too. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, although I will say the Braves were favorites to win or make it to the World Series in those seasons. So, you can't always say, again, I'm looking at Boise State and saying, I don't know if we can look at Boise State making the playoff and having a game against Penn State and say, well, probably Penn State was the better overall, more talented team. They were more likely to win that team, even though Boise State was the higher seed. Texas, Arizona State. Texas certainly seemed to be, Texas is well regarded these last 2, 3, 5 years as one of the 5 most talented teams in the country. And they've been right there the last couple of years knocking on the door. So Arizona State was kind of a surprise team, not the team everybody was looking at. But they got to the Big 12 championship game. They won it. And, but you look now, their running back from that team is now very successful in the NFL. So they clearly had some NFL talent. They were led by a star player who is a NFL talent. They've got a dynamic young coach. They're not having that kind of success this year, but they're still a winning program. And all in all, they might have just been a little underlooked. And they certainly, like I said, they probably could have and should have won that game against Texas, gave Texas everything they could handle. But it's hard to say for sure exactly. And then you had Oregon. Oregon was the other team that took on Ohio State after Ohio State beat Tennessee at home in a game where most people were looking at it and thought, hey, Tennessee's got a substantial psychological edge. Ohio State is down in the dumps. They missed the Big 10 championship game. They lost to Michigan yet again, 4th year in a row. They got 2 losses. They're basically lucky to be in the playoff. But then they come out at home. They come out on fire. They beat Tennessee 42-17. Then they come and they play Oregon, a game it's a rematch of a regular season game in which they lost, albeit it was a close loss. They just lost by I think it was a 32-31 game, and they being Ohio State, had famously gotten into field goal range to potentially kick the game-winning field goal, but their quarterback at that time, a little younger as a big-time starting quarterback at Ohio State, and younger in the season, mid-season. He'd been playing at Kansas State before, but he transferred. But the moment at the time seemed a little big for him. He took off on a scramble when there was only a few seconds left in the game, and he slid and he went into a long slide and it was too late, and basically he slid out the clock, and they were already in field goal range. He just needed to get down sooner. He needed to make sure that they left time to go for that game-winning field goal. They didn't, and they lost, but either way they were behind, as at the end of the game, they were behind. And so it's not like, it all just came down to that play. So they get a rematch. Ohio State gets a rematch in the quarterfinal with Oregon, who they had lost the regular season game to earlier. And as a result of that game and the Michigan loss, Ohio State didn't even play for the Big Ten championship, but Oregon was the Big Ten championship winner. They played against Penn State and beat them. Penn State still made the playoff, had the home game, like we talked about. They eliminated SMU, then came into the quarterfinal and eliminated Boise State. So, that's sort of a recap of last year's playoff and what happened. But again, we can't determine or know for sure that having the bye means you're going to lose. But you had a top-ranked Oregon team, and you had a top number 2 Georgia team, both of whom looked like real contenders, real threats to be a part of make a longer run in the playoff than a one and done. And both those teams had the bye, and both of them lost. Arizona State, Texas, maybe that was a fairly even matchup. Arizona State was a little bit of a surprise champion, but the Big 12 is one of our Power 4 conferences. And then Boise State was your group of 5 representative, but they were a high enough seed that they got, really because the ACC didn't have their ACC champion ended up being Clemson, which was also a surprise. They had lost their regular season finale to South Carolina. They had 3 losses, but they got into the ACC championship game. They kind of back-ended into that, and then they got the chance to play SMU, and then they beat SMU, who everybody had sort of already anointed into the playoff. And so all of a sudden they claimed an automatic spot into the playoff. That ended up bumping Alabama out of the playoff. And because nobody wanted to throw SMU out of the playoff, having lost its conference championship game, the rule of thumb or thinking here has been you shouldn't lose your playoff spot if you'd earned it in the regular season by playing in the conference championship game. And so SMU got to keep their spot. Clemson got a spot. That bumped Alabama out because Alabama was sitting in the 11th playoff position, or what would have been 11 of the top 12 teams. And so it's not just the 12 teams. And then Boise State was higher ranked in the playoff rankings than Clemson. So they as a conference champion, although albeit a group of 5 champion, they got that seed. And so as that number 3 seed, they were then matched up against Penn State when Penn State took out SMU. So that's kind of a recap of what happened in the playoff. And the net result was having the bye, didn't seem to help people out. And one theory behind that is maybe the 4-week layoff is too much. And from a practical point of view, and I was relating to the baseball, the long layoff in baseball seems to have been a negative in the baseball playoffs. Teams that have had that have sometimes struggled. We've seen that. And I would say, just practically speaking, I think a 4-week layoff is a little bit long. You play the season, you build some momentum. You do worry about injuries. And when you have some guys that are hurt and banged up, it's nice to think you got some time to make sure that those guys get healthy and you have your best team out there when you go to play in a championship and a playoff game. But I think in the end, the 4-week layoff, so playing an extra game compared to other people, meaning your conference championship game, and then having a 4-week layoff, that seemed to be kind of the worst of all the possible ideas. That extra game cost us. We lost our starting quarterback. Now, you may look at it now and say, and I know a lot of Georgia fans feel this way, that, and look, I'm going to probably officially declare at this point, I'm in agreement. I think we are a better team at this moment with Gunnar Stockton at quarterback than Carson Beck last year. Carson Beck 2023, that was a potent offense, one of the best teams in the country, and I think that team should have made the playoff. It was one of the 4 best teams in the country, despite the loss to Alabama in the SEC championship game. And I think Carson Beck showed that he had the commands of that offense. But last year, things were a bit shakier. He had not quite as dominant an offensive line. He didn't have as strong a run game. He didn't have as good a receiving core. And with all those things, all of those phases taking a bit of a step back due to attrition, you still had a team that was an 11-game winner last year in Georgia, an SEC champion, but definitely a team that was not as powerful, a little bit again like this year, definitely not as powerful looking moment to moment as Georgia had been in the previous 3 seasons. But still, Carson Beck was the quarterback, and we lost Carson Beck in that SEC championship game. And so, sure, I can say now that I think our offense this year with Gunnar Stockton, and I think this team with Gunnar Stockton as its leader, is a better team and a better overall offense than last year's team was with Carson Beck. And I think Gunnar is also a quarterback who is able to work better with lesser. He can do more with less. And I don't think he's actually having to. I think we have a better receiving core this year. The running backs are playing better this year. The offensive line had a lot of shaky moments early in the season, but as the season goes on, I think it's becoming more clear that the talent and the overall level of the talent as these guys are getting experience maybe is probably a better overall offensive line this year. And I think we have bright future with this offensive offensive line. But early in the season, you had guys that are basically true freshmen starting in the SEC, and you don't see that a lot on offensive line. You had a lot of injuries, and so even freshmen that were supposed to be starting, like Juan Gaston, a mountain of a man at 6'7", 6'9", whatever. I think he's 6'9". It's 367 pounds, but he's just a huge man, and he's really playing well. And so are some of the other young guys who have been getting experience all season. And you always hear coaches say that by the time you played 10, 11, 12 games, especially in the SEC, you're not a freshman anymore. And that's what's happening. These guys are coming together. They're gelling. The offensive line looks really good. And so it's probably true that Gunnar is playing behind, at this point in the season, a better offensive line than Carson Beck was playing behind at this point in the season last year. And I'll say that clearly our wide receiver core has become much more dependable. Guys like Zachariah Branch are catching virtually everything that comes to them. Colby Young, before he got hurt, was really doing great. Now, Noah Thomas has been a little slow starting, but he's really come on these last 2 games, blocking and catching better. London Humphreys was a here and there performer when he first came on board last year, but this year he's been a consistent weapon when he's had the chance to touch the ball. Dylan Bell has been much more electric and exciting this year, and he has provided several key moments, whether it's end arounds, running the ball, or big catches downfield, and he's made some big downfield catches. So, we're just seeing a lot more people emerge throughout the team, and we're not seeing the kind of drops. And the tight ends, as the offensive line, as I mentioned a podcast or two ago, as the offensive line is gelling and coming together better, the coaches and Bobo, I think, are more confident in giving Gunnar some more downfield passes, and they're more confident in creating some opportunities for the tight ends to stop having to be in tight and blocking so much, and helping out with the offensive line. But now the tight ends are able to release and get out, and we've seen over the last 2 or 3 games, we've seen that the tight ends had to play in a lot more against Florida because of how good their defensive front was. But in the games against Ole Miss and against Mississippi State, and sandwiched around that Florida game, we have seen the tight ends really make some big plays. Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky both. Lucky had a huge game against Ole Miss. Delp had a really nice game against a sort of a Bowers-esque game against Mississippi State. And so, this offense has maybe better overall weapons, better offensive line, and the running backs. We are really seeing a commitment to the run. Frazier rips off 180 yards. You go back, Chauncey Bowens had 119, 120 yards against Alabama. They're both up over 400 or 500 yards in the season. They're both averaging more than 5 yards a carry, and Gunnar is contributing to the run game as well. And that's the point I guess I was trying to get to is, look, Gunnar is probably doing more with more. This offense is probably gelling as the season goes on to be a better overall offense than last year across the board, both at the skill and the line positions. And Carson Beck, in running that offense, he's been a better quarterback as this team has developed. Early in the season, we did really need him to make plays with his legs. We needed him to dance around the fact that we had trouble protecting. And we had trouble with a mix and match line and new guys getting used to what they were doing, though talented, and injuries holding back some of those people and holding back the combinations we wanted. And so we asked Gunnar to play close to the line, to make short screen passes, and to be ready to make a play with his legs. And sometimes that seemed like he bailed out of plays that could have been bigger in the game, but you rarely saw him. He's had very few sacks. While we haven't generated a lot of sacks on defense, we also haven't given up very many. We've only been sacked 11 times on the season, all of our quarterbacks combined, and through 9 games. So that's just over 1 a game. That's not so bad. And a big part of that is Gunnar's mobility and staying out of trouble. So all of that was a tangent. I went off where we're going to be talking about playoffs and SEC championship and the question of whether or not we want to play in the SEC championship, but it dovetails back to the point. And the point was, last year, our starting quarterback, was injured in the SEC championship game, and that affected our playoff run. We were able to win that SEC championship game, and we may look now and say this team is better off, and I know a lot of you feel that way, and I'm saying that. I'm saying, look, this is a better offense this year, and this is Gunnar Stockton is a better fit at quarterback for the University of Georgia right now than Carson Beck was at this time last year. However, Carson Beck was the starting quarterback at the going into the SEC championship and going into the playoffs last last year. He was the guy who got us to a secure playoff position. It's not like we snuck into the playoffs either, by the way. I mean, we were the second overall seed. We were the SEC champion. We were 11-2, and we were the number 2 seed. We were number 2 team in the country. So he didn't just backdoor us in there by accident with, a little lucky play. He guided a team into the playoff as a quarterback. But and even though we may feel like we're better now with Gunner, the offense for the whole year, as you build your plays and you build what you can do, and your offensive coordinator, Mike Bobo, looks at what guys do. And I was talked about this in the last podcast too. I think we're seeing Bobo continue to build off the early season. Early season, we had to play a lot of short screen passes, a lot of passes all within a yard or 2 or 3 of the offensive line. You had Zachariah Branch, Colby Young catching plays, Dylan Bell catching balls on the outside 1 or 2 yards over or behind the line of scrimmage, and then having to make plays either with some blocking or on their own. And now what you're seeing is Bobo build off of that. We've had several plays in the last couple games where a player like Branch is going out into the flat, and then it looks like, and you see, as dangerous as he is, you see the defense react to that. When those guys step up, then there's usually a middle option and a deeper option, so you have 3 layers on that side. So the flat is drawing players down. The interest in that, because one, Zachariah Branch is incredibly dangerous, and 2, through most of the season, through the early part of the season, the first half of the season or more, that ball has often gone to Zachariah Branch in the flat. So it's reasonable for the defense to look at that and say, I got to cheat down there and get ready to catch this guy, because he's busted 40, 50-yard touchdowns from a screen pass. So that defense cheats into that, and then next thing you know, you got maybe Noah Thomas as the deep layer option in the corner of the end zone, like he was against Florida, I guess. Yeah, the touchdown against Florida, where he was the deep option in the corner. And you had, and you see, or sometimes the tight end or somebody's running out in that middle option. So you just, that's what you want to do, right? Is you want to move the defense out of position just enough so that you can make a play. And then on top of that, we've been building all season on what we've been doing early season. And now some of what we were doggedly doing early season that we were frustrated about is actually helping pay off now in creating chunk plays and bigger yardage plays. When early in the season we were having to sort of live through a bunch of 8 and 9 yard plays. So there's been an evolution. And so there was an evolution last year too. The team evolved around what Carson Beck does at offense. The offensive play, the playbooks, what they practiced, what they were ready for, the way the team had developed all season long through 10, 12, 13 games was built around Carson Beck being the starting quarterback. And even though we're better off now, all of this is to say, so when Gunner comes into that game, yeah, the team rallies and we win the SEC championship. But clearly we were out of sync and not quite what we would have liked to have seen. We didn't even get 300 yards offense against Notre Dame. Yes, Notre Dame was primarily, the best thing about Notre Dame last year was its defense, and they were a top level defense. But still, the offense, Gunner did his job as best as he could, but you could tell that the offense wasn't molded around him. So it was a bunch of short, quick passes. He threw for a couple hundred yards on a whole bunch of passes. Yard per attempt was way down. Just wasn't very efficient performance, even though it was a solid make no mistakes or make minimal mistakes performance. And it was not a dynamic offense. And and you can just see, look, that team was not tailored to Gunner Stockton yet as the offensive leader. This team is. And so now that's that comparison. So again, long-winded tangent. It makes an important point that we need to consider, and it's an important thing we're going to be talking about over several topics lately. So it's not off topic, but to dovetail back to what I was trying to get to, this is a downside potentially SEC championship, right? When the season ended, we were in playoff position with or without the SEC championship game. So by winning it, we secured our position as not only in the SEC championship, but having the bye. But again, did we want that bye? Texas was in the SEC championship game with us. They lost. They got the home game. They won that home game against Clemson. Then they won the next game against Arizona State. They advanced 2 games through the playoff. And generally, Texas is thought to have had a more successful playoff. That helped springboard them into the preseason number one, along with the hype about Arch Manning taking over at quarterback. But part of where that hype came from was they were springboarded a little bit from the perception that they had a good playoff run. They got to 13 wins. They got into the semifinals against Ohio State. And they gave Ohio State probably its most competitive or best game in the playoff. And so that perception, the perception that came from Georgia, is that Georgia was not the Georgia of old. The offense looked weak. They sputtered around. They didn't do much, and Notre Dame won. And that's pretty much true. I mean, the defense, as I've said many a time when referring to that game, defense held Notre Dame to, one offensive touchdown. And so and well under 300 yards for the game. So the defense did its job. It was the offense, even though Gunner threw for a couple hundred yards, it was the run game was non-existent. The line wasn't able to do much. And, Gunner, the limited plays that Gunner had at his fingertips, I think running that offense kind of on an emergency basis was not enough to get Notre Dame out of their comfort zone as a really high level and elite defensive unit. So I can't believe I'm saying it, but again, I'm coming to a conclusion or a point where I'm asking, do we want to be in the SEC championship? Are we better off? I mean, as fans, first of all, I think everybody saw the enthusiasm and the excitement of the home playoff games, and those were fantastic. And all those teams won, and it was like a big raucous party, right? Everybody got a rare, hardly anybody's ever seen their team play at home in December. So they all got to come out in December, the week before Christmas, or Christmas week. The games were like the 20th and 21st. So you're a few days ahead of Christmas. You got cold weather, you get to wear your warmest weather gear. And you do something historic and never seen before. First ever on-campus playoff games in the postseason. And there was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of excitement. All those teams won. All those teams seemed to carry the momentum into the next week. And on top of, not only did we play the extra game and then have the extended off. So we played an extra game and we had more wear and tear, I guess is what I'm saying, on our team. As an example, we lost our starting quarterback. That's the point I'm really getting at, right? Think what you will about the starting quarterback, and the caveat I just put on all of where we are we better now or not with Gunnar Stockton? Point is, we lost our starting quarterback playing the game. We did win the SEC championship, and that's not nothing. That's part of our historical record. And you know me, I'm big on our history. That moved us clear in second place, all-time SEC championship history, 15 SEC championships, second all-time to Alabama. And it puts a definitive bow on a season where you say, look, we beat most of our rivals. We lost to Alabama and Ole Miss in the regular season. Ole Miss is not one of our bigger rivals. Alabama's a new rival, but we beat Florida. We beat Tennessee. We beat Clemson in that season. We beat a lot of our traditional rivals. We beat Georgia Tech in the 8 overtime epic thriller that will always be remembered. It's great when you have a game like that and you say, oh, I remember that. I was part of that. It's an always remembered game. Going back in my history, everybody remembers the first ever SEC the first ever SEC overtime game when the first overtime rules had been implemented. We had the game at Auburn where the game finished tied. That was the game where Uga, the picture right there, if you're looking on the video, if you have the video podcast, I'm pointing to it right there. That picture over there is Uga trying to take a bite out of the wide receiver Robert Baker for Auburn. And so that was an exciting moment. This was the first SEC overtime game. It was a 4 overtime thriller. Georgia wins it in the 4 overtimes. I wasn't at that game. I watched it on TV, but it was a famous game, and it's fun to be a part of that. We'll all of us who watched and lived and died through, whether you were at the game or you watched it on TV, last year's 8 overtime epic Georgia Tech game, you'll always remember that, whether you remember much else about the season. You might not even remember we won the SEC championship, but you'll remember that game. The SEC championship put a nice bow on that season. And so you can say, hey, look, we didn't win the national championship. We had an opportunity maybe to win a 3rd national championship in 4 seasons. Didn't work out. We were in the playoff, but again, maybe a big part of that, maybe Carson Beck as the guy who had been very successful as the Georgia quarterback the season before and that season, getting us to that position. Maybe Carson Beck could have done more since the offense was tailored around him against Notre Dame. Maybe we could have advanced. And yes, it didn't look like a vintage championship team, but as I keep saying, Ohio State didn't look exactly like a vintage championship team either, the way they played the season. They were a 2-loss team, didn't even play in their conference championship game. And again, that kind of emphasizes my point, doesn't it? They got to recuperate. They didn't do their Big Ten championship game. That was Penn State and Oregon. Penn State did win 2 playoff games. Oregon won none. But Ohio State went home, licked their wounds. They developed a whole new mentality. They practiced hard. They got ready, and they came out 3 weeks later, and then they played 4 consecutive weeks of just great football and won a national championship. And so, again, you can't draw every conclusion from that, but it begs the question. And I raise that question because here's another thing. So we want to take stock of where we are. I've said before, all season we've been saying, how do we compare as a championship program? Does this really feel like a championship team? And no, this doesn't feel like the Georgia teams of old, but I think we've covered that enough. We've established, and now we don't have to. Look, all the other things out there point to the fact that, look, we're number 5 in the country. We're number 5 in the championship standings. You look at the other teams up and down around us. Look who's behind us, okay? In this week's playoff rankings, we're number 5. Who's behind us? Ole Miss. Well, we beat them. Okay, but they've had a legitimately good season. They only have the 1 loss to us. Okay, BYU came into it was next behind them. They were undefeated. They lost last weekend. Texas Tech was right behind them. They beat BYU, so now they move up. BYU will move down, right? But they're in the pole position, the Big 12 as the Big 12 leader. Then you have Oregon, who's another team from the Big Ten, like Ohio State and Indiana, up at the top of the rankings. Here's Oregon, only has 1 loss to Indiana, who's number 2 in the country. So then you get to Notre Dame at 10. Now that's a little more controversial, right? Notre Dame, this is last week's rankings. Notre Dame has 2 losses, and what most people keep saying about Notre Dame is, well, they played great since those 2 losses, and those 2 losses were, 1 on the road and 1 at home against teams that were top ranked. Well, Miami was one of those teams, and they've fallen off, and they no longer look that impressive. They're still in the rankings in the low teens, 18. But so it's not horrible to have lost to the 18th ranked team in the country, but basically the biggest claim to fame most people can point to about Notre Dame, in my opinion, is that they lost to 2 highly ranked teams. So, and that they were 1-score losses. Okay, well, a loss is a loss. You lose by a score. We lost out. Nobody. I don't hear anybody continuously reminding everybody how we lost to Alabama by just 1 score, both last year and this year. We were just by 1 score or less. I don't hear anybody going, oh man, Georgia's really good. You can tell because while they lost to Alabama each of the last 2 years, it was just by 1 score. Who cares? You lost. That's what mattered, right? Didn't matter that we lost by 1 score. We lost by 3 points in the 2023 SEC championship game. Still let Alabama get our playoff spot in what I think could have still been a run to a 3rd straight national championship. So losing's losing. I don't understand why everybody's so excited that Notre Dame lost a couple 1-point games or 1-score games, 1 on the road and 1 at home to teams that, are pretty good or really good. Texas A&M's ranked number 3. Great. You lost to number 3. We lost to number 4. Who's giving us the credit? If Notre Dame's getting a lot of credit for losing to number 3, how come we don't get more credit for losing to number 4? Both at home, right? Whatever. So anyway, that's my little gripe with that. But that's just running down through the playoff. And my point is, look, those are the teams behind us: Ole Miss, BYU, Texas Tech, Oregon, Notre Dame, Texas, Oklahoma. These are there's nobody back behind us there that you say, oh, they definitely should be higher ranked than us. They're definitely a better team than us. So we may feel a little bit like, yeah, we're 5th, but we haven't really been great this year. We're not as good as, no, we're not. And we've covered that. I'm going to stop talking about why we're not as good as we used to be. You know it. We've talked about all the reasons there. Nobody's as good as they used to be. That's just the way it is. But you look at the other teams out there, and that's the perspective we've been trying to have all year. What we're doing on the field? What does that tell us about what our team is this year? And what it tells us is, we're legitimately number 5. We're as good or better than all those teams I just listed that are behind us. And below them is even lesser teams with lesser records. And when you look at the teams in the top 5 and the top 10, I've mentioned this point before. We're one of the only teams. There's only a handful of teams in the top 10 that have wins against current top 25 teams, and not just current top 25 teams that project to finish probably in the top 25. So, because again, I'm not that concerned about what the ranking was when you played them. Florida was 15th at one point in the season. Somebody beat them, ooh, you beat Florida. Or I know that I think Illinois was 9th maybe when Ohio State played Illinois. Indiana was. I saw this. That's what I was looking at. I was looking at Indiana's schedule. So Indiana's beaten Oregon, who's a legitimate top 10 team, I think, but they haven't won any other game against a current top 25 team. And so they played Illinois and destroyed them, beat them like 63-10 or whatever. And Illinois at the time was ranked number 9, but Illinois is not the number 9 team. They're not even a top 25 team. So I don't care that they were 9 at that time. I mean, sure, put it down in history, and you can say Kirk Cignetti as coach, Indiana as a team has an all-time win against a top 10 team because that's what they were ranked at the time. And you can write down the history books, but when we're judging teams to decide who's worthy of a playoff, who's the top team, where do we seed these teams for this year's potential championship run, I don't care that Indiana beat Illinois. That's nothing impressive. So, it's not nothing. I mean, maybe it's the equivalent of us beating Mississippi State last week. It's a solid win, but they're not the number 9 team. That's the real point, right? They weren't the number 9 team. They were there by default. They're now out of the top 25 because of their play. So they shouldn't have ever been in that number 9 spot. They weren't not worthy of that, is what I'm saying. So we have a win against the current number 6 team in the country. We beat Ole Miss. Okay. We lost to the number 4 team by 1 score. Okay. And then we have a win against the Tennessee, who's like 21st. So maybe 23rd in last week's playoff poll, but like 21st in the AP poll. So we don't know where they'll be yet. So we have 2 wins against legitimate current top 25 teams. And then, you can look at the rest of our schedule and judge what kind of quality and talent those teams are. So our resume is good. Ohio State has 1 win against a current top 25 team. Indiana has 1 win against a current top 25 team. Alabama has the best resume. I made that point before. They had, coming into last week, they had 4 wins against, at that time, current top 25 teams. And this is the nature, I've made this point several times too. This is the problem with football, right? Is that this bar is moving all the time about current rankings because Alabama had beaten Missouri, and Missouri is a really tough team. They've got a great defense. They play tough. They play hard, and they had a quarterback they were high on to start the season. He got hurt. They had a next guy up who was maybe just as good or better. Now he's hurt. Now they're down to their third. They had to start a true freshman quarterback, a guy who never started a game before, against Texas A&M last week. Well, that didn't go well. Texas A&M is legit. They're good. And, starting a true freshman quarterback who'd never started a game before, even though it was at home, that didn't go well for Missouri. So now Missouri has got 3 losses and they're out of the top 25. And look, that's not unfair. That's who they are. I mean, it's a lot to ask any team to have to carry 3 or 4 quarterbacks that could all be top 25 level program handlers. That's too much, right? Goes back to this argument from Florida State a few years ago. But at this point, that's who Missouri is. Missouri right now, ranking today, is a team with a great defense, a good run game, and is a good quarterback, shy of being a playoff contender. Now that they've lost their quarterback, unfortunately, they're not a playoff contender anymore. So now the real question Missouri is going to face is whether or not they're going to be able to hold on to their coach, Eli Drinkwitz, while all this major coaching carousel goes on. So, but again, reason I got into that was saying Alabama, before last week, had played and won 4 games against current top 25 teams. Well, Missouri's now fallen out. They lost their quarterback. But they still have 3 wins against current top 25 teams. So including against us, number 5, Georgia. So when you look at the resume, you look at the records, you look at the teams they played, you look at the statistics, we're right there. Are we the best? No. I mean, Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M have all played better. Alabama beat us narrowly, but they did beat us. We could have and should have won. I keep saying it. And if we had it, the whole narrative would be changed, except for the major difference, I guess, is we would be, and if you want to say, well, where would we be right now had we pulled out the Alabama game? Had we converted that fourth down, gone on to score the touchdown, win the game, and hold on defense? Where would we be right now? Well, we'd be second or third, I guess, probably. I mean, I doubt we would have overtaken Ohio State because I just think the tendency is for people to say, look, they're the defending national champions, and they're on paper, Ohio State is more powerful than we are, even if you gave us the win against Alabama. Because the stats from that game wouldn't have been remarkably different if we'd finished that game off and won it. So we might be over Texas A&M because we'd have a more impressive resume. We probably might be over Indiana because we have a more impressive resume. Indiana has been beating people up more. But we would have, the win against Alabama. But then Alabama, the zero-sum nature of this is Alabama right now is number 4, 7-1. Remember, they lost to Florida State, and that's not aged well. That's a bad loss. But if they'd lost us, then they'd have 2 losses. So they wouldn't be number 4. You look down at the number, where are the 2 lost teams? Well, your best 2 lost teams, I've already brought up Notre Dame, Texas, Oklahoma. Texas is 11 last week. Oklahoma was 12 last week. Utah was 13 last week. So those are your best, so Alabama, had we won the game, would be somewhere down in that range. They'd still be maybe in playoff position. They'd still be definitely a playoff contender if everything else had gone the same. They still would have had 3 wins last week and 2 wins this week against current top 25 teams. They wouldn't have the win against us, so that wouldn't have gone away. But they would be, they would be now, after last week, they would be 8-2, and they would probably be back in or around the top 10, but they wouldn't be number 4. So we would be at least 4, maybe 3, maybe 2, but we're number 5. So does that make a big difference? Again, right now, the difference in that would be right now, as the 5th team, we are just outside the seeding. So we are sitting there as the top home playoff team, right? That's our position right now. And I guess that's the comparison of all this, meaning that we, as the 5 seed, would take on the 12 seed. So last week, that was projected to be Memphis because there is no group of 5 team who was in the playoff committee's top 25. So they had to keep ranking until they got down to 29. They said, okay, if we keep ranking teams, we say Memphis is the 29th team. Now that's now your highest ranked top 25 team. And so, with that being your highest ranked group of 5 team, I'm sorry, they're not in the top 25, but that made them the highest ranked group of 5 teams. So that would have made them the 12 seed, and we're the 5 seed. So we would get them. So that's great. So not only do we get a home playoff game, a historic moment in Sanford Stadium in December, but we also get a game against a team that we generally think we should favorably play. It should be a good matchup for us, right? I mean, I don't think very many of us would sit back and think, oh man, we have to play Memphis at home. Forget playoff. If that was just on our schedule right now, Memphis at home, I'd be like, okay, we should win that. That should be and Vegas would probably see that as a 2 or 3 score game, at least a 2 score game. I'm sure the line would be somewhere between 10 and 17. So I think that's a good position, and that sounds like fun, right? Like, hey, a home playoff game, historic moment, Sanford Stadium in December against a team we should win, get some momentum and move on to the next round. We get 3 weeks off and no SEC championship game. That's where it would be right now if everything came together as it was today. And so I think that I think I could live with that. I think that's a good play. I mean, I'm excited about that. So I guess what I'm grappling with, and I don't know how you feel about it, you can tell me, share your comments, tell me about this. I'm struggling because last year I was really proud of it. I told you this season, I was really proud that we won the SEC championship. Big thing to hang our hat on last year. But looking at it now, it cost us our starting quarterback. We had to play a whole extra game. It was extra wear and tear on the team. We had to play a whole extra game, and then we had a long layoff. So, and I'm not sure how those go together. You get an extra game, but then a longer layoff. So it just seems like in terms of sharpness, a 3-week layoff instead of a 4-week layoff without the extra game was better. And I hate to see the value of an SEC championship just mean nothing. Say, well, that doesn't mean anything. But that's where we are now. The playoff has kind of come in and dominate. You have this before all of my life, and for most older fans, winning the SEC because of how its status as a conference, as a premier conference, winning the SEC was a huge deal. And everybody used to say, you go back, Spur used to say, you win the SEC, everything else will settle itself out. That's always been our goal. That's what Kirby Smart came to do. That's what Nick Saban said when he came to Alabama. We go out, we win the SEC, everything will take care of itself. That's what you play for first, because that's what we control. We don't know if we make it in the playoff. We don't know if we make it into the right bowl game or how we get voted in rankings, but you can control winning the SEC. You can win all your SEC games, go to the championship game and win it. You can control it on the field. And so if they award us the opportunity to play for a national championship because we're SEC champion, then so be it. If not, hey, we're SEC champion, and that means you're the champion of the toughest conference year in and year out in the country. So that was something to say. But now that we have this playoff the way it is, we've expanded. And the point is you couldn't expect to win a national championship all the time. What Saban did is unprecedented. Okay, 6 national championships in 17 seasons at Alabama. And that's still only one every other season or two, or one every 3 seasons, roughly, right? I guess 6 in 18 would be 1 in 3 seasons. So 1 every 3 seasons. So are you just writing off the other 2 seasons, even if you're Nick Saban, even if you're the greatest of all time? And for the rest of us, it's maybe 1 championship every, for a blue blood program like Ohio State, Georgia, Texas, what should be the expectation? Probably at least 1 championship a decade, right? A decade shouldn't pass without winning. I know it did for us. That's what part of the consternation was. 40 years, 4 decades passed. Well, we don't want to see that happen again. But now it's been, the 2022 season. So the 2023 season, was Michigan. 2024 is Ohio State. So now we got the 2025 season. Hopefully we can get back in there. So we are legitimately the number 5 team. I don't feel we're ahead. I think we are better than those teams behind us. I think the teams ahead of us have the better. Alabama's got the better resume. Texas A&M's undefeated. They have not played as hard an SEC schedule, but they are undefeated. Indiana's undefeated. Ohio State's undefeated. I'm willing to give some deference to that. I'm not going to say we're better than them, even if our resume, even if our schedule, our strength of schedule is harder and better, and I think it is. So I'm willing to look at that and say, okay, those teams are out in front of us. But in a head-to-head matchup, and that's what the playoff comes down to, and I've been bringing this up all season, especially the team that you see emerging this last couple of weeks. One, you've seen this team never give up, never die. Josh Pate keeps saying you got to cut up the head off the snake, and nobody does, right? Except for Alabama, kept us down. I don't even know if they cut the head off. They just held us down long enough to get away. But that never die, gritty mentality. And we seem to have the things you need. Like if we need to be in a shootout, Ole Miss, Tennessee, to win the game, we did that. If we need to play tough-nosed defense to win the game, we've done that too. We haven't been great defensively for a whole game, but we've been great for chunks of games, even as much as 2.5 quarters of a game. We've been fantastic defensively. It's just most of those games were equally not fantastic. So that's a little bit of a problem. So I think we deserve our space. I think we deserve to be where we are. And I have to say right now, comparing to last season, I would be more excited today if you just giving me my wish, like, what do I want? I'd be more excited about that home game against a group of 5 team holding this 5th position than I would be at the moment about winning the SEC championship. And I hate to say that. That is a really weird thing. That is something that this system has done to me a little bit and to all of us. It's made us focus. Even though I've been championing this idea all season, I've been telling you, hey, let's not just focus on championships. Let's look at our history. Let's enjoy adding to our history. Let's look at our rivalries. Let's enjoy adding to beating our rivals year in and year out. That's 5 in a row against Florida, 9 in a row against Florida, 8 in a row against Auburn, or 9 in a row against Auburn. I've lost track of that one. I keep having to go back. Anyway, these are great things, right? So it's already made this a great season. Something that we've had some really fun, great moments that we can look at and say, wow, that was exciting, that was thrilling, and it's been a good season, and we're giving it a championship ride, But the playoff system does make you focus on the playoff, and winning a couple national championships makes you say, hey, I want to win a national championship. Do I think we would be favored against Ohio State right now? Probably not. Do I think we could beat Ohio State? I think we could. I don't know. I haven't tried to break down that matchup yet and say, I think their defense is really tough, but who have they played? Their offense is about like ours. It's good, but not amazing. They have two amazing wide receivers, and their offense has been evolving through the year. What I have watched of them is they were a little sketchy earlier, and they're getting better and better as they go. Again, they got a first-time starting quarterback, guy who never started a game before, super talented, and now he's leading them and making great plays, and he's figured out how to utilize two big-time superstar wide receivers. Their run game, though, not great. They've had some protection issues, and so they're a good upper level, upper third of the country offense, but not the best. And any team that's a little bit one-sided like that, no run game, two great wide receivers, and good quarterback play, you can find a way to take away that and beat them. Now, they have a great overall defense, but it hasn't really played a lot of great offensive teams either. So we are a really, really good offensive team. Are we a great offensive team? No, but we're really well-rounded for all those things I talked about earlier in this podcast. So would Ohio State's defense be able to completely shut down our offense? So the margins, of what you see, and I keep talking about this a lot, but the margins of what you see on the stats kind of tend to shrink when teams of similar talent play each other. Ohio State's offense, our defense may be able to do something to be athletic and hang with them and take away some things and force them to be more one-dimensional. Of course, they like being one-dimensional in the pass game, and that's where we're weak. So that maybe is not a great matchup for us if we were playing Ohio State. But their defense may not be able to look as powerful and hold us to under 10 points a game like they're in under 250 yards a game like they're everybody else, because our offense is consistently able against even good defenses to go out there and grind out 400 or 500 yards a game and put up 30 something points. So are we going to do that against that Ohio State defense if we played them? Probably not. But could we put up 300, 350 yards and 20 something points? Probably. Is that enough to win? Might be if our defense can hold their offense down, right? So they definitely be playing a more equal talent level. Indiana, do I think we could play? I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't know enough about Indiana just watching them play. I think Mendoza is great, and I can see why there was rumors that we wanted to have him. I can't tell much about their schedule, though. You look at Indiana's schedule, I think they're legit. I'm not saying they don't deserve to be there. They're undefeated. They've been doing this 2 years in a row. They beat Oregon on the road, and that's a team I believe in. But that's their only win in this. They're 9-0 on the season, or 10-0 on the season this year, and they win 11-1 or 11-2, whatever it was last year. They won 11 games last year. I just forgot whether they lost 1 or 2 in the thing. But so they've now won 21 games in the last 2 seasons. Of those 21 wins, the only one that tells me that they could beat a high-level team is the one against Oregon. When they played their 2 big games last year against equal competition that I think mirrors what we could do on the field. Those 2 games were against Ohio State in the regular season. They got beat 38-17 or 15, I think. I mean, they got beat pretty bad. And then they played Notre Dame in the playoff, and they lost 27-17. And Notre Dame really thumped them. I mean, they were not competitive. They couldn't run the ball. Notre Dame's defense stuffed them, and Notre Dame's defense stuffed a lot of people. But Notre Dame's offense also nearly put up 400 yards of offense. When Notre Dame played us, their offense couldn't find their way out of a wet paper bag. So it was mistakes that we made, the strip sack fumble, the kick return for the touchdown, the half. Those things let Notre Dame win the game against us. Their offense did nothing. A field goal and a touchdown, I think, is all their offense produced. And I'm pretty sure the only offensive I have to go back. I've said this before, but I think the only reason they got the touchdowns, we gave them the strip sack fumble right in our own territory. So do we want to play in the SEC championship game? Or would we rather be in the position we're in right now as the season closes out? We're worthy. So here's the message. We're worthy of where we are. Now, we got a lot to do to keep earning it, right? We've got 3 games left, or 3 games left. Yeah. And they are tough games. We've got to play Texas at home, And look, Texas is, I don't know what to say for sure about them. Their offense seems to have come alive. Arch Manning's all of a sudden gotten better. And again, you grow over the season. You get better over the season. So we knew he was talented, and we know Sark is a great offensive coach. So this shouldn't be a real surprise. They've been playing all season getting better like we have, and maybe they're really getting better. Or maybe they've just had some good luck against lesser teams the last couple weeks. I'm not sure. But Texas is not dominant. They don't look like a team we couldn't beat, but it's certainly going to be a challenge. And they do have a great defense, and certainly great defenses can help. We might be better offensively, but have a little less defense. They probably are a little better defensively, and we have, a better offense. So I don't know. We're going to break that down more, but it's going to be a tough game. But right now, look, ESPN's FPI gives us a 60% chance of winning the game. We are a 6.5 point favorite, and we're kind of just holding at that. So we're almost a 1-score favorite. The typical bump for being at home is 3 or 4 points. So the line says we're better than Texas, even on so in other words, on a neutral field, we'd still be a 2 to 4 point favorite. So the line that says that on a so if you're a favorite on a neutral field, then the thought is you're a little better team. So we're a little better team than Texas. So we got Texas, Charlotte, and then Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is a top 15 team right now. They're 8-1. Yeah, they lost to NC State, and that's kind of how the season's going. People can lose to anybody. Their defense is not good. Their offense is elite. They're playing at an elite level. They have a guy who's basically doing the Gunnar Stockton thing and Haynes King, except he's been doing it a little longer, and he might be at the moment just a little more proficient at it. I don't know that I'm not saying I'd rather have Haynes King than Gunnar Stockton. I probably wouldn't. I'd probably take Gunnar Stockton, if for no other reason, because Gunnar Stockton has been a Bulldog since, his grandparents are Bulldogs, his family. I mean, he's a Bulldog, right? So, yay, Gunnar, go Dogs. But also Haynes King, I think, is a little less polished as a passer. I think Gunner's an overall better passer. Haynes King, they're about the same when it comes to running the ball. Haynes King keeps that offense moving. They don't have many negative plays. They keep producing, and they outperform their talent to a certain level, and he kind of wills them to that, and that's great. But he doesn't play defense, and their defense is terrible, and that's what happened against, NC State. That's how they lost the game. They went on the road and they put up a bunch of yards and a bunch of points, but the other team put up a bunch of yards and a bunch of points too and took it away from them. So, they let NC State match them offensively, and that shouldn't happen. Their defense should be better than that. So we're going to be favored in all three of these games, but they're tough games. I mean, we got a lot of work to do to close it out. And, we're in a good position, and we should be able, if we do win out, we will hold or improve this position. We won't go backwards. And if we do win out, it'll only, just like last year, as we won the SEC championship game after the tough Ole Miss loss, and we won out and then end up winning the SEC championship, we end up being the number 2 team in the country and an odds-on favorite, one of the 2 or 3 favorites to win the national championship. And I think we can be in that position again too. Ohio State certainly be favored, I guess, against us right now. If we had to play Alabama again, I don't know. That's probably a coin flip game. Alabama won, but just barely. They have that impressive resume I've talked about, but they hadn't blown anybody away either. They haven't fallen behind big time like we have, but they have not really been blowing teams away, not good teams. Most of their games against good teams, like the game against Missouri and the game even this last week against LSU, was a close game. I mean, it was a 1-score game in the fourth quarter before they put it away against LSU. And LSU is a talented team, but again, not a good team. That's why their coach is fired, is because they weren't a good team. They had a lot of talent, but they're not really that good. Texas A&M, Texas A&M's playing at a high level. They're doing what they should do, but oddly enough, they're in a position where they haven't played a lot of great teams in the SEC. They haven't played us. They haven't played Alabama. They haven't played Ole Miss. So, Texas A&M, it's hard to say exactly how good they really are, but we will get to see. Right now, the odds-on idea is that, look, Texas A&M, what they have left is South Carolina, Samford, and Texas. So we have Texas, Charlotte, Georgia Tech. Alabama has Oklahoma, that's their last, and then Eastern Illinois, and then Auburn. So, and then Ole Miss has Florida, an off week, and then Mississippi State, the Egg Bowl. Talk about the SEC teams. Texas, of course, has us, then Arkansas, and then Texas A&M. So Texas, like us, Texas and us have a lot to do. But Texas already has 2 losses. But although they only have 1 loss in conference, right? One of their losses was to Ohio State. So if we want to get to the SEC championship game, then right now Alabama and Texas A&M, one of them has to lose, because you need to get in a situation where now you have tiebreakers between a bunch of teams that are 7-1. And, if it came down to us and Alabama at 7-1, well, Alabama won, and that's the straight tiebreaker. But if, for instance, it was Georgia, Alabama, and Texas A&M, so if we beat Texas, and then Texas beats Texas A&M, and Alabama lost to Oklahoma, okay? Now there's no commons. We didn't all play each other. You're going to end up at the tiebreaker that's going to be the cumulative record of the SEC teams they played. And that favors us. We've played a harder SEC schedule than Texas A&M. That's why I came to notice that Texas A&M has the cumulative record of the SEC teams they played so far as a losing record. So if we ended up in that tiebreaker, we would win. So if we end up with only one undefeated team and several one-loss teams, including Georgia, then we could be heading for the umpteenth, it feels like, Georgia-Alabama SEC championship game. That's still a high chance that could happen. However, we are not in the prime position because we have 1 loss and there's 2 teams that are undefeated. And so Texas A&M just has to beat South Carolina, Samford, and Texas. They're in the SEC championship game. Alabama just has to beat Oklahoma. Of course, Samford and Illinois, I was going to say, and Eastern Illinois, they don't have to beat Eastern Illinois, but you know what I'm saying. So they have to be, so I guess to clarify that, Texas A&M has to win South Carolina and Texas. And if they win those 2 games, and they could, then they're in the SEC championship game, guaranteed. And Alabama, if they beat Oklahoma and Auburn, are in the SEC championship, guaranteed. And both of those teams will be favored in both of those games. So it feels like that's an odds-on idea. That's the likely scenario, right? But if one of those teams stumbles and gets into 1 loss, and we maintain the 1-loss position, which means we have to beat Texas, then you're going to end up with Texas would be out of that because Texas already has 1 loss. If we beat them, then they'll have 2 losses. So now you'll be looking at Ole Miss and say Georgia and Texas A&M. So that's what I was saying. So that's the scenario maybe that makes the most sense, right? Is if you get Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Georgia. If Alabama goes undefeated in the SEC, they beat Oklahoma, they beat Auburn, and so they're in. And then Texas A&M loses its end of the season game to Texas after we beat Texas. In that scenario, Texas is eliminated because we put them at 2 losses. And then Ole Miss can finish off Florida and Mississippi State. So you end up with Ole Miss, who we beat, and Georgia, and Texas A&M, who neither Ole Miss nor Georgia played. So you can't use the head-to-head. And so there's something in there about the best record among the best team or something like that. But I think it's mostly would end up at the tiebreaker, which is the cumulative record of the SEC teams. And right now, that would favor us in those matchups from what I've seen. Seth Emerson in The Athletic has a great, the former Strictly Georgia reporter who now does SEC stuff for The Athletic. He has a good breakdown of this whole scenario. And it's all very complicated. But long story short, Alabama and Texas A&M, if they win out, and they very well could, they should be favored in their remaining games. They'll be in the SEC championship game, and we'll be in the position we talked about, playing for our best seed. And in that version, we still want to win out, because we want to guarantee, I think the best position to be would be in that 5th slot, right? There's a pretty good chance right now that the group of 5 team is going to be a 12 seed because Memphis lost last week. And so now the rumors, when the playoff committee announces the rankings tonight, the rumors say it'll either be South Florida or Tulane will move in that position. Again, neither of them are in the top 25. So if you want to have a fun playoff game in December, build some momentum, move on to the next round, but not have the toughest game in the world, then we stay in that 5th seed spot. Then we get the home game, and we're going to play whoever that group of 5 team is, because that's going to be the 12th seed. We can kind of see that from here. And I was going to talk more about the playoff in general, and I think there's a few things I want to get to, but I'll just throw out a couple words, I guess, real quick about it. Look, the playoff rankings last year when they were released, the first rankings, so there's 12 teams make the playoff. So of the top 12 teams in the playoff ranking, they release rankings of top 25, but the top 12 in the first week last year, 9 of the 12 teams from that rankings ended up making the playoff. So the 3 teams that fell out were Alabama, BYU, and Miami. Miami played their way out by going 1-2 down the stretch after the playoff committee released their first rankings. BYU played their way out. They were in the same position they were this week. This week, BYU was in the ranking at number 7. And was that right? Number 7? Let me go back and look. I had it up here and then I lost it. So where did I go? Yeah, BYU was 7. They were 8-0. And they were 8-0 last year and in the playoff ranking. And then they went 2-2 in the remaining 4 games last year, and they played right out of the playoff rankings. And so far this year, and I'm not knocking on them. I have no dog in that fight, to be honest. I don't care whether they make it or not. They're good. Seems like a nice team, whatever. But they started off just like last year. They're 8-0 last year. They went 2-2 and played themselves out of the playoff. This year they made the first ranking at 8-0 and they lost the first game. I'm not saying they're going to lose, another game or two. I don't know what's going to happen, but they have started in the same mode by losing the next one. So Alabama went 3-1 after last year's playoff rankings were released. They didn't really play themselves out. They were 11th in the first list, in the first ranking. They were 11th in the final. Again, they got displaced when Clemson surprisingly won the ACC, and the room had to be made for the ACC champion to get into the playoff. And so that bumped Alabama out. So they didn't really play themselves out. Clemson played their way in. They went 4-1 and won the ACC. ASU, Arizona State, played their way in. They weren't even in the top 25 in the first rankings last year. They ended up taking BYU's spot. BYU didn't make the Big 12 Conference Championship game. Arizona State did and won it, and that's how they got into the playoff. So BYU falls off. ASU climbed from out of the rankings to ultimately the number 3 seed or 4 seed. They were the number 4 seed, I think, actually. And then SMU played their way in. They went 3-1 after the rankings were released. They were 13th in the first ranking, and they finished inside the top 10, and they held on to that spot. So 9 of 12 teams of the top 12 teams in the first playoff ranking made the playoff. And I think we're going to see that again this year. I think that the rankings are more stable. There's a lot of, up and down, and teams. Look, we lost after the playoff ranking was released. We lost Ole Miss by, the worst loss we'd had in a while, in addition to losing, period. A multi-score loss and looked bad on the road. We fell all the way out to like 12th in the rankings, which, again, when you considered the rules about who's seated where, would have left us on the outside. But then we played our way back in, and we ended up as the number 2 team by the time the final ranking. So there is some movement, but that's also has a lot to do with the fact that what I also looked at is 7 of 9 teams that made the playoff that were so of the top 12 in the first ranking, 9 of that top 12 made the playoff. 7 of those 9 teams took a loss. So only 2 teams that made the playoff and were in the playoff position when the first rankings were released. Only 2 teams went undefeated. That was Oregon and Notre Dame. So taking a loss in these last 5 weeks of the season from when the first rankings are released doesn't necessarily mean you're out of the playoff. There's a lot of jockeying. Most of the teams are going to take a loss. So you'll fall down maybe if you're one of the first to lose, and then maybe you climb back up. Maybe that's what happens to BYU. Last year, BYU went 2-2. That wasn't good enough. They fell out. This year, they were 7. They lost their first game right after the rankings were released. Maybe they work their way back in. Maybe this time they go undefeated the rest of the way and they win their conference championship game. Maybe they get a rematch against Texas Tech. They win the conference championship game and then they represent the Big 12. So, there's no guarantees the way that works out. But I think it's interesting to note, and when I look at these rankings, I think we see the same thing. Ohio State, they're going to stay in? Yeah. Indiana, I think Indiana, what Indiana has left on the season, Wisconsin and Purdue. That's it. So Indiana's number 2 right now. They're not falling out of the playoff rankings. Okay, you can pencil them in. Texas A&M. Texas A&M's 9-0. They could play. They could be. Texas A&M could be this year's Miami. Miami like I said, went 1-2. Miami was 9-0 when the first rankings were released. They go 1-2, bounced right out of the playoff. Okay, so Texas A&M could be. I'm not saying they will be. I'm not predicting that. But I'm saying they could be because they're 9-0, and Texas A&M does still have some games they could lose. I mean, South Carolina, tricky game. Samford, they'll win that. That's a gimme. And then Texas. I mean, they could stumble against South Carolina, and then turn around and win against Texas. I mean, and lose against Texas. If they did that, if they just won the Samford game only, then Texas A&M would fall out of the rankings. They go from being number 3 to out of the rankings. But I think they got a good shot. Okay, I don't think that's going to happen. I actually think it's hard for me to think. I mean, if you start projecting out and you say, well, if we beat Texas and they beat Texas, is Texas going to end up with 4? They have 2 losses already. They're going to end up with 4 losses. 4-loss Texas. Did we really think this Texas team goes from preseason number 1 to 4 losses? I don't know. Maybe. So makes them a little dangerous. Like I said, I mean, I don't know if they lose both of those, but so Alabama's going to hold in the rankings. I think we're going to hold in the rankings. I mean, we're in the same position I was just describing at Texas A&M. We got to play Texas and Georgia Tech. We could lose both those games. Those are both good teams good enough to beat us, especially if we fall behind and make mistakes. So I don't think we will. I think we'll at least win one of those. And as long as we win one of the 2, I think we're in. Ole Miss has nothing left. So I say nothing. They got to play Florida, Mississippi State. And they got Florida, a bye, and Mississippi State. Yes, they lost to Florida last year, and that knocked them out. And I would say they remember that last year, but frankly, half the team is different this year. So I don't know if they remember or care. But I think Lane Kiffin remembers and cares, and I think that they'll be locked in, and I think they're a solid team this year. I was impressed by what we saw when they played us. I expect them to beat Florida. I expect them to beat Mississippi State, and that'll keep them in. Texas Tech is already at 9-1. Again, they're probably going to make their conference championship game. They could get a rematch against BYU, and they could lose that. They look dominant against BYU at home. They beat them handily, but it doesn't always work, Back 2017, as we talked about, Auburn beat us handily, 40-17. We came back, beat them 28-7 in the SEC championship game. So, they're both good enough to beat each other, I guess, is what I would say. So, but Texas Tech at 9-1. What else do they have left? UCF and West Virginia. So they're going to make their conference championship game. They just have to beat a mediocre UCF and a mediocre or West Virginia team. So I think they can do that. They probably will. So they're probably good. Oregon, same thing. Oregon's got a little bit tougher. They got to play Minnesota. USC, that's a ranked USC team, bottom of the top 25, but they're ranked. Washington, who was ranked but lost this week and bounced out, but still, that's a team that's like 6-2 at Washington or something. So they got Minnesota's a well-coached team. USC is a top 25 team. Washington is on the verge of being a top 25 team. Oregon doesn't have a cakewalk, but they should be favored in all those games, and they should win them. They've had some trouble with Washington, though, so we'll see. Notre Dame has nothing. Well, Notre Dame, so game day, as you might have noticed, chickened out. They were presented with our game was the best game on paper this week, number 5 versus number 10 in the AP poll. And they have to make their decisions long before the college football playoff poll is released on Tuesday night. So, but I think, just 3 weeks after they were here for the Ole Miss game, probably didn't want to turn around and come right back to Georgia. They could have chosen the Alabama-Oklahoma game in Tuscaloosa, but they were just in Tuscaloosa 4 or 5 weeks ago for the Alabama-Vandy game. So, and they probably don't want all the non-SEC fans screaming about how biased they are about the SEC just because they, own the SEC television rights. So they chose the Pittsburgh-Notre Dame game because Pittsburgh squeaked into the bottom of the top 25 this week. And they're 7-2, and they're the only decent team Notre Dame has left. They have Syracuse with a losing record, Stanford with a losing record. So if Notre Dame can get through Pittsburgh this week, then they will also probably finish the season undefeated, and everybody will give them lots of credit. Well, they lost 2 games, but then they won 10 in a row. 10 in a row against nobody, okay? Nobody, no ranked teams. They will play. This is that zero-sum thing coming back into play. Pittsburgh is ranked right now, but if Notre Dame beats them, they'll fall back out of the rankings and probably finish unranked. And so there's a decent chance that Notre Dame ends up with only one win on the season against USC. And that's if USC can avoid being bounced out of the rankings. But again, they have to play Oregon. So Notre Dame could end up with no wins on the season against, right now they have one win against number 20 USC. So if USC loses to Oregon and anybody else, they could be bounced out of the rankings and finish the season unranked. And so Notre Dame could finish the season with nothing but those two great losses to be all excited about and no wins against a current top 25 team. Texas has got this, basically do exactly what we have to do. Texas has to play us. Then they have a game against Arkansas, and then they have to play Texas A&M. So they got to play us and A&M. Those are two tough games. Arkansas is not a gimme, but they should win that one. But so Texas has a lot of work to do. But Texas is in a good position because Texas was in the bottom of Texas is the first team out in last week's rankings. They were ranked 11th, but again, because of the group of five winner having to be in there and the conference championship rule so there was no ACC team that was higher ranked than in the top 12, 13, 14. So an ACC team had to be bumped up in there. So when you looked at last week's ranking, it was Virginia came off of the where were they ranked? Let's just look. Virginia was ranked 14th. So Virginia gets bumped into the top 12 because they were the highest ranked ACC team. There has to be an ACC team in there. So that meant that at 11, Texas was ranked 11, which should put them in the playoff position, but like Alabama last year, would have got left behind. Well, Virginia lost, Louisville lost behind them, and so they've moved up in the AP poll to number 10 this week. But they have a chance. Texas can play their way in because they've got the games against number 5, us, and number 3, Texas A&M. If they split those, they probably have a good chance of making the playoff, although it's going to be dicey because then they'll be a 9-3 team. So they could be our first 9-3 playoff team to earn an at-large spot. But they might have the resume to back that, especially because either of those wins. To get to 9-3, they have to beat a top 5 team. And if they manage to win both those teams, then both those games, then they're definitely in. They just Texas has no problems, even though they were on the outside looking in last week, because they can play their way in. They have the opportunity in front of them, so it's up to them. Then you start getting in Oklahoma, and they have Alabama, Missouri, LSU left. That looks like a tough schedule for them. It's hard to say how they'll do. They're kind of on the outside looking in. They need some help. So, long story short, I think 8 or 9 of these teams are going to stick. Just like last year. So I think mostly what we see at the bottom, I think we see movement in the group of 5, just like this week. Memphis fell out, and now it's either UCF or Tulane will move in, and then we'll see if that holds. We got a few weeks to see how that plays out. Texas was out, even though they were 11th, because of the way everything was playing out. But as of right now, they would be back in, and they can win their way in. If they win their way in, it might bounce somebody else out. But BYU right now has lost, and they're probably going to drop down to 12. I project that they'll come in maybe at 12th in the college playoff poll this week. So they are 12th in the AP poll. So that's a reasonable spot. And if they come in there, then they will probably get passed over for the group. The group of 5 team definitely bounces them out, even though they're 12. They won't make the thing because of the group of 5 team. And at the moment, we still have the ACC problem. There is no ACC team represented among these top 15 teams we're talking about. So you're going to have to go down and find the highest ranked ACC team, which right now in the AP poll would be Georgia Tech at 14. So what's going to happen is you're going to have your 1 through 12, and numbers 11 and 12 probably get bounced in favor of the group of 5 team, either UCF or not UCF, USF, University of South Florida, or Tulane, maybe are the front runners for that at the moment. And then Georgia Tech right now, if you were picking who's in the lead of the ACC, well, Georgia Tech's the highest ranked team, but I don't know where they are in the rank. I mean, I guess now what you have is a bunch of teams with 1 loss in the ACC. So who knows how that's going to settle out. So that's I'll give you my projected rankings. I didn't do that yet, but I'll give you 2 things. I'll tell you what I think the ranking will be this week for the playoff committee tonight, and I'll tell you what I would have done. So I think what will happen is I think it'll be number one Ohio State. I think the playoff committee will look at Alabama. I think they'll look at A&M, maybe not being quite as sharp last week, and well, I take that back. They were super sharp. They beat Missouri handily. So what was I was thinking about? No, I guess I have that reversed. So I think I reversed this, and I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to say, but what I'm going to say is Indiana. Well, really, it's Indiana wasn't sharp, right? They had the thriller against Penn State, but they shouldn't have been close against Penn State, right? Penn State's not a good team. I mean, Penn State may be a talented team, but they're not a good team. They don't play like a good team. They've lost 6 in a row, which is nearing like some sort of a program record, or is one of the worst stretches in the history of Penn State football. So I don't think we can sit there and say, well, Penn State's a good team. They are talented, and they were talented, especially when they had an NFL starting quarterback. But without him, now they're a lot less of a team. So I think what happens is I think you have Ohio State, Texas A&M, then maybe Indiana, then Alabama, or you might flip those. But I think Indiana loses a spot for playing it close, and either A&M or Alabama or both jump them. And then I think we stay put at 5, Ole Miss at 6, Texas Tech moves up to 7, Oregon moves up to 8, Texas moves up to 9, Notre Dame I think will be there at 11. Then you slot in BYU at 12, Utah holds steady at 13. And then I think your bottom entrance, where Virginia and Louisville lost and fell out, then I think you replace them with Vanderbilt at 14 and Georgia Tech at 15. And I think that'll be your top 15. I don't care about the rest of the top 25 in the college playoff ranking, but I think that's your top. I think that's your top 15. Ohio State, Texas A&M, Alabama, Indiana, Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas Tech, Oregon, Texas, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, BYU, Utah, Vanderbilt, Georgia Tech. Here's how I would rank them. I would rank them Ohio State, Texas A&M, Alabama, Indiana, Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas Tech, Oregon. I would put Texas ahead of Notre Dame, and I would put Oklahoma ahead of Notre Dame. So I just don't believe in Notre Dame. I'm sorry. I just don't think they have much on their resume. And I think Oklahoma's got a couple top 25 wins, also a couple top 25 losses. Texas has a couple top 25 wins. And I think they're all 7-2, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, and Texas. And I just don't think Oklahoma's resume is as good. I don't care that you lost to top teams. I think you got to win some games too. You can't just lose to good teams. So that's what I would do. And so we'll see. We'll see how that comes together. After the playoff ranking, we'll come back tomorrow. We'll talk about it. We'll see what you got. Last thing I want to say is, look, I am not a fan, and I haven't said this yet, I am not a fan of the 12-team playoff. I think I have said that, actually. But I've never said what I would do. In my perfect world, if I could wave a magic wand, I think I've said, what you've heard me say a bunch of times is that I think the 12-team playoff creates charity. And it does. I mean, there's just no two ways around it. Boise State, SMU, last year's Indiana team. I don't care about this year. Just look at last year's Indiana team. Probably Tennessee. Those are all teams that really were not playoff worthy. They didn't look great. They didn't play well in the playoff. Maybe Tennessee, borderline. I don't know. They had a good season, I guess. But definitely these other teams, those are teams that in no era of college football would those teams have been considered worthy of competing or being thought of in the national title conversation. So I think when you get to 12 teams, I've found it hard, even as I try to put together my own rankings. I see what I did. I actually read you the rankings backwards. I probably shouldn't admit this mistake. You probably don't care. But now that I look at it, here's my projected rankings were that they would be. I'm going to go back and fix this real quick. Ohio State number 1, Texas A&M number 2, Indiana number 3, Alabama number 4. This is what I think the committee will do. Georgia 5, Ole Miss 6, Texas Tech 7, Oregon 8, Notre Dame 9, Texas 10, BYU 11, Oklahoma 12, Utah 13, Vanderbilt 14, Georgia Tech 15. That's what I think the committee will do. What I would do is Ohio State 1, undefeated. I'll leave them there, although Alabama has a better resume. Because of Alabama's resume, I'd have them at number 2. I'd have Texas A&M at number 3. Because Indiana was shaky, I'd move them back to 4. I'd leave us at 5. Ole Miss still at 6. Texas Tech at 7. We're all the same there. Oregon at 8. That's probably about the same. This is where I would differ, is I would have Texas jump up to number 9. I think Texas has a better resume as a 7-2 team than Notre Dame as a 7-2 team. I think Oklahoma has a better resume as a 7-2 team than Notre Dame is. So I'd have them move up to 10. Then I'd have Oklahoma at 11. Then I have Notre Dame at 11. So Texas 9, Oklahoma 10, Notre Dame 11. And I think the committee will actually come out with Notre Dame 9, Texas 10, BYU 11, and then Oklahoma down at 12. But I would put BYU down at 12. I think they still have a chance to play their way back in. They'll probably get a shot at the conference championship game, but I'd move them down to 12. Utah, I'd have at 13, Vanderbilt 14, Georgia Tech 15. So I jumbled my projected and my what I would do. So that's how I would do the playoff. That's my playoff ranking. Ohio State, Alabama, Texas A&M, Indiana, Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas Tech, Oregon, Texas, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, BYU, Utah, Vanderbilt, Georgia Tech. And what I find when I get to that, when you do this exercise, it's always easy to argue the poll when you see it come out. But what I found when you do the exercise of actually trying to rank them yourself, you realize when you start getting down around 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 to 15, there's not that much that makes these teams great. You look at them and you're like, Georgia Tech at 15. Look, I am super happy about Georgia Tech. I've said this. I want them to be great so that we can beat them. I want the Georgia Tech matchup to be an elite annual. Everybody's eyes on it. I want people to forget about a game. Ohio State, Michigan, I could care less. I want people watching the Georgia Tech game. I want it to be number 1 versus number 3 every year. Huge matchup. Who's going to win the national championship? Who's gets the best seeding in the playoff? So Georgia Tech has to do their part if that's what's going to happen. I still want to beat them, and I'm still going to revel in it. I want to beat them 100 times out of 100. But the rest of the time, I'll laugh if they're on hard times. We'll make fun of them. But I'd rather see them be great. So I just think it'd be better for the state, be better for college football, be better for Georgia. Or be better for college football for us. Probably not anybody else. Probably nobody else cares. But for us, it would be better if we have this team on our schedule every year that's an elite team. Just make our schedule better, and then it'll be more impressive when we beat them. So that's what I would like to see. So anyway, but again, I wasn't trying to rip on them. I'm just trying to say you get down to the bottom of this top 25, the top 15 even, and I'm just saying it's really these teams are all 7-2. Texas, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Utah, Vanderbilt. They're all having nice seasons. They're all top 25 teams. But as you're trying to jockey 9 through 15, where do they really slot? What separates Notre Dame at 7-2 from Texas at 7-2? I'm saying Texas has a harder schedule. They've been more, they've got a better resume is what makes the difference to me. I think Notre Dame doesn't really have much of a resume. So I'm not impressed that they played the 2 best teams they played and lost, and then they beat a bunch of mediocre teams. Texas is at least, beating some ranked teams. They're playing in the SEC. They went on the road and they played Ohio State. They lost by 1 score. I think Texas has a better resume. So, but we're really, neither of those teams, Texas, Notre Dame, and throw back in Oklahoma and Utah, Vanderbilt, Georgia Tech, neither of these teams are, could they get on a run and win the national championship? Maybe if they're given the chance. I don't think so when you think about Vanderbilt and Georgia Tech. I think Vanderbilt's a great story, but I just don't think when I watch them play, they're not complete enough to win a national championship. I haven't seen Utah play, but I don't think so. BYU maybe, but they really got beat well by Texas Tech last week. Notre Dame, I already said I don't think so. Oklahoma looks flawed. You're talking about flawed teams. So you're not looking at teams, even once you're at 9-10, you're not looking at teams. You're like, wow, this team, definitely is a national title contender. So I think the obvious choices for national title contention stop sometimes after number 3, as early as number 3. And maybe down to 8 or 9. And so I think it's an interesting exercise. You should do it for yourself. It gives you something to really chew on and think about when you say, well, wait a minute, let me rank these teams. You start to realize by the time you get to the bottom of the top 25, frankly, you're just throwing darts like, well, I'll make you 19th, I'll make you 20, whatever. It really isn't. There's not that kind of distinction. The real distinction lies at the top. And so, what does that mean? Well, it means that that anything, this 12-team playoff and a potential 16-team playoff, it's just charity. You just got a bunch of teams in there that are going to get beat and that weren't really serious playoff contenders. And so I was fine with the 4. I could have stuck with that and been great. I think it was a huge improvement. I think the bowl and poll system led to some wonky stuff. With 134 teams in one giant group of teams, you're never going to have everybody play everybody. You're never going to have equal schedules. You're never going to be able to put the conferences together in a way where the champions can play and play their way through. That's just not going to happen. So you use the polls and then you put teams together. The old system of bowl and poll, where you automatically go to this bowl and that bowl and that bowl, and we just put them in and then we vote at the end. And sometimes number 1 in the country is playing number 9, and sometimes number 2 is playing number 3, and then number 5 is playing number 7, and then we again vote at the end. That was a little bit silly. So we did better. The BCS was an attempt to bring it to something that made more sense, but we all hated that. So that led to the 4-team playoff. I think the 4-team playoff is great. A lot of the years, the 4th team in the 4-team playoff hasn't. That's what I mean by, I'm not even sure many years when you look at it, there's really 3 teams that you say these are truly worthy of winning or playing the national championship, playing for the national championship. TCU got in the game 2 years ago or 3 years ago, whatever. They got in that season against, they beat Michigan. So they did get that one game, but there was they couldn't get through 2 games. By the time they got to us, they got hammered. And I think the thing when you added 12 teams, you look at last year. Look again. I keep bringing up Ohio State. We only have the 1 year so far, the 12 to look at. But look at what happened. This, again, talk about charity. This was charity. I mean, Ohio State would not have been champion in any version in the history of college football before last season. Okay, the 12-team playoff made Ohio State a champion they never would have been in any other format in the history of college football. Okay, because that 12 teams allowed them to get in and win their way from a first-round game all the way through. They had to win 4 games, and they were great, and they had the talent to do it. But I think that's the problem. I think everybody's, this is great, this is access. Okay, if you're excited that Boise State got to be in the playoff and SMU got to be in the playoff, and then they were bounced immediately and looked inferior doing it. If that excites you and you're happy about that access, then great. But I do think you've diminished the regular season because, like I said, even now, I'm looking at teams with 2 losses down in the bottom of the thing. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know which one of these. A lot of these teams don't have any real resume to back it. Even some of the 1-loss teams. Oregon's got 1 loss. That's usually a pretty elite level to be at, and yet they haven't beaten a top 25 team this season. Or they've beaten 1 maybe. No, I don't think they've beaten any. They lost to Indiana. So I'll look that up real quick while we're talking about it. But I think that so Ohio State's charity, their championship last year, they would never have been in a position to have even played in a bowl game and been voted champion at the end of last year. They never would have made any version of BCS or playoff before we expanded to 12 teams. They were down and out. They didn't make their conference championship game. They lost 2 games. They lost for the 4th time in a row to their major rival. They had nothing to hang their hat on. No, Oregon has no wins against any top 25 teams this year. They played and lost to current number 2 Indiana. But against the current top 25, they have no wins. They played Penn State when they were still ranked number 2 or 3 or whatever it was at Penn State, and they won that game. And they won it by 1 score. But of course, Penn State since then has lost 5 more in a row and is not anywhere near a top 25 team. So I don't think we're going to go back and assign that much credit. It looked like a nice win at the time, but it was also like the 3rd time in a row they've beaten Penn State. Because again, the reason Penn State has fired their coach and lost faith in him and the team's playing like crap is because they've come to realize that they can't beat anybody good. They haven't won a game against another high-level team, whether it's Ohio State or Michigan or Oregon, in forever. So what would I do? Again, I think the 12 teams makes charity. I think when you get down to the end, we're having to go beyond the top 25 possibly to find the group of 5 team and put them in and say, here's your consolation prize for being in the group of 5. You get to get in the playoff and get hammered by a better team. Congratulations. We created access. Yay. We gave you a spot to get beaten. Aren't we wonderful? I just don't see the point in it. We should really be looking for the top teams. So I think more access a little bit maybe makes more sense. The old bowl and poll system where teams went off in all these different directions and we didn't have a championship style game or settle on the field. I think that didn't make sense. I thought the 4-team playoff was great. I don't know why we had to move from that. Regular season was super exciting. You even if you went undefeated, it didn't guarantee you would make the playoff, but you gave yourself a chance. You did everything you could. You knew what the assignment was, and you just tried to go out and do it. And we'd get the 4 best teams. And sometimes even by the time we're getting that 4th team, it's not even clear that the 4th best team, again, a la TCU, is even worthy of consideration. They weren't. The other 3 teams were legit, but even though they beat Michigan, yes. So, and that's my point. This system, the Boise States are going to have to try and win 4 games against back-to-back against Georgia, Texas, Ohio State. It's not going to happen. Could they beat one week? Yeah. Yeah, if the conditions are right, they play a great game, the team they're playing against plays poorly, they could win the one game. They're not going to win 3 in a row. Ohio State did what, I think the charity here is you've given a team, Ohio State got the charity because they had a 3rd chance. They lost 2 regular season games, shouldn't have even made a playoff, wouldn't have made a 4-game playoff, wouldn't have made an elite bowl. They would have been a Citrus Bowl team last year, okay? But they were given a 3rd chance. They got in the playoff, they took it, they ran with it, they were talented enough, they got hot, and they won a national championship in a season where otherwise their record would have given them nothing else but a Citrus Bowl in any other season. So that's the charity. And what you've done is by having 4 games you have to win in that format, it's going to take the blue blood teams with the best talent are going to be the ones who win those games. Arizona State and BYU and Boise State probably not going to win 4 games to make it through the playoffs, especially if they keep coming every year up against Texas and Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State, Michigan when they're on, you name it. So I would do if we couldn't have stayed with the 4-team playoff, and that just seems untenable. And I know there was a sense of unfairness with that because it's really hard to see how you get a group of 5 team in that. And at the time, we had 5 power conferences. You couldn't even get all 5 power conference teams in there. And so there was this argument like, hey, I won my conference. So, okay, so we expand. So what do we expand to? Why do we go to 12? I have no idea. It's a weird number anyway because you have to have the 4 bye teams. I would have done 8, and I think an 8-team playoff would be great. So, according to the way I would rank my playoff ranking, so if I took my top 8, the way I would do them this week for week 2, Ohio State, Alabama, Texas A&M, Indiana, Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas Tech, Oregon. Okay. Every team in that's either undefeated or 1 loss. I mean, you literally stop at 2 loss. In my version, I would add Texas at 9, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, BYU. So you stop right there at 2 loss teams at Texas. And so you've had to have an elite season. Regular season's still very meaningful. And now you got a 4-team playoff. It's going to be 3 games. You got to win to get through it. And I would argue that all these teams, I mean, in my version, the way I ranked them, you'd have Ohio State versus Oregon would be your 1 versus 8 matchup. Okay, great game. You'd have Indiana. This is if it started today. Now, again, before the season's over, we're going to have a Big Ten championship game. The Big Ten championship game could be Ohio State and Oregon if Indiana somehow faltered, but I doubt they will. But that's a possibility. So, but right now you just start with quarterfinals and your 1 versus 8 matchup be Ohio State, Oregon the way I would rank them. Indiana versus Georgia is your 4-5 matchup. Texas A&M, Ole Miss is your 3-6 matchup. Alabama, Texas Tech is your 2-7 matchup. So you got your Big 12 champion in there. You've got Big 10 teams. So basically what you have 8 teams. You have 4 SEC teams and 3 Big 10 teams and your Big 12 champion. So yeah, the ACC gets left out of that. But hey, you had 8 slots. If you couldn't get a team in the top 8, then that's your fault, right? Like how, again, we don't need that's what happens. You start going to 12 teams to make sure, 16 teams to make sure that the ACC, that everybody's conference champion gets in there. Well, they're not worthy. There isn't, the ACC doesn't have a team right now we don't have the conference. Again, we don't have this week's college football poll out yet. Last week, their highest ranked team was Virginia at 14. So we'll see what happens when the poll comes out. I project this week 15 will be Georgia Tech. And so the highest ranked team they're going to have is 15. So if you stop the season right now, didn't do, emergency, we have to stop the season, there's no conference championship games, then, when the poll comes out, if Georgia Tech is that top ranked ACC team, then they're 15. I'm sorry. That's your best team. You're outside of the top 12. You're outside, or in my version of 8, you're outside the top 8. We gave you 8 slots. You couldn't get inside the top 8. Your best team wasn't inside the top 8. You didn't deserve to be in it. So I wouldn't I wouldn't give any deference to conference champions. I wouldn't do anything special about that at all. I'd just seed the teams 1 through 8 and play the games. And then you'd have 4 games and then 2 semifinals and then a championship. So, I think it'd be great. That's what I think. And I think we'd still have very meaningful, because right now my top 8, like I said, you would have 3 undefeated teams and 5 one-loss teams. So the bar is still very high in my version of that 8-team playoff. The bar is not very high when you have to go look for some team outside of the top 25 because we've granted them a gimme spot from the get-go. And I dang sure wouldn't do the Big Ten. I mean, I know the Big Ten wants to be able to guarantee some amazing playoff format every year, so they want 4 guaranteed slots. No, thank you. Even as an SEC fan, I don't want guaranteed slots for the SEC, the Big Ten, anybody. I think you should play your way in. I think we should have it. I mean, even with this 12 team, if we could play our way in, I'd be okay with that. We did a little better last year because at least we eliminated that seeding where the conference championships got the highest seed. So you had a team might be the 4th seed, but they end up as the 7th seed because we had to elevate the highest ranked conference championship into what that was so confusing and just dumb, right? So this year we've at least improved it to where the 4 buys will go to the 4 top seeds, regardless of that. So you could have 2 or 3 teams from one conference in the top 4 if that's how it works out. Right now, last week's playoff poll, it was Ohio State, Indiana, 1-2. So they would have been 2 of the buys. Texas A&M and Alabama would have been the other 2. So this week, I project that will still be the same 4 in those slots. Okay, I think we might see a jumbling because I think they may knock Indiana out of that 2 spot because of the way they played and because of how well Texas A&M played. They may elevate them all the way up to the 2 spot. That's what I was trying to say before. I got confused. I was like, wait, I was looking at it and thinking that it was Indiana. I said A&M, but it's Indiana that played a close game against an unranked team and maybe drops down, and A&M went on the road against a ranked team, albeit not ranked anymore, and just beat them up 38-17. So I think A&M could move up into that 2 slot. Ohio State will stay number 1. Indiana falls then to 3. Alabama holds at 4. We hold at 5, so on and so on. And then I don't think you'll see much major difference until you get down a little later in the poll. So, but that's how I would do it. That's what I think about the playoff. I'm still uncertain. I'd love to hear comments. I'd love if you guys shared some information, what you think about should we wish to be in the SEC championship game? Should we wish to win the SEC championship game? I mean, I guess once we're in it, might as well win it, right? We're playing the game. We're expending the energy. We're using the players. Might as well go ahead and win it. So if we get there, I certainly want to win it. But do we want to get there? We talked about what the scenarios are. Somebody's going to have to lose. We need to have, and we have to beat Texas. We could probably lose to Georgia Tech. I mean, obviously losing to Georgia Tech isn't going to change the SEC championship. So our last conference game is this Texas game. We win that, we'll be the clubhouse leader at 7-1. We have to see how many other people finish at 7-1. If Alabama were to lose to, say, Oklahoma, and they then go on and beat Auburn, if only us and Alabama are 7-1 and Texas A&M finishes undefeated, then it'll still be Texas A&M and Alabama because Texas A&M would be there. Alabama and us would be 7-1. If nobody else is 7-1, then Alabama gets the head-to-head. So we need there to be at least 2 teams at 7-1 if we want to be in that game, so that we get to a total conference record of which favors us. And so there's still, I mean, it's probably, I think they have a number on it. It's still probably a 40-50% chance that you could have yet again another an Alabama-Georgia SEC championship game. And the one thing I would say about that is we would only be the second team to make 5 straight SEC championship games. So I think that would be, we're looking for our 5th straight. So I think that would be an interesting, we've been in 7 of the last 8, but not 5 straight. So we've been, so it'd be another mark of history in the SEC history if we did make it this year. But again, I'm looking at it and saying right now, where we are looks really sweet, right? That 5th spot where we get the home playoff game against a group of 5 team, build a little momentum, have maybe just the perfect amount of downtime and rest to get people healthy, implement some practice, stay conditioned, but then come out and play a game that gives us a chance to kind of reestablish after a 3-week off, beating a group of 5 team and then move on to playoff could be the perfect launch for a playoff run. And we saw it last year. Not saying I want to always replicate what Ohio State does. Maybe it's not such a bad idea. So anyway, this has been your SEC championship, your playoff and Georgia prognostication, where we think things are going to go, where do we want it to go. I've given you my projections of what I think the playoff committee will do in their rankings. I've told you what I would do with the rankings, and I've told you what I would do with the playoff in general. I would scrap this 12-team crap, and I would go to an 8-team thing. I can live with that instead of 4. I'd have been just happy with 4, but I'd take 8. I think 8 would be exciting. It'd be a great tournament. And I don't know. I'm still interested. We'll keep talking about whether or not we should wish to be in the SEC championship game and or win it. I mean, once we're in it, we should win it. But should we wish to be in it? I don't know. I do wish to beat Texas. I don't want to lose any games. Whether we make the SEC championship or not, I want to finish this out. I'd love to finish the season 11-1, which would include wins against Texas and Georgia Tech and Charlotte. But, I'm kind of penciling that one in a little bit. So, anyway, lots fun to think about. Playoff rankings will be out tonight. We'll talk about them again some more. We'll see how my projections stack up against theirs. Hope you have a great evening. Hope you enjoy hearing about the rankings. Hope you enjoy thinking about Georgia football as we get ready for big Texas game this week. Chance to beat Texas for the 3rd time in basically about a calendar year. So that would be pretty exciting. Horns down, baby. Horns. Wait, how do you do the horns thing? This is horns? Horns down? I don't even know how to do it. I noticed the other day, we don't do a lot of hand signs. Like Miami, like, well, we got the U. Michigan does some upside down. That, like, they think that looks like an M. I guess you do this. It's supposed to be an M. I don't know. If you'd have to be, I apologize if you're just on audio. I'm doing hand gestures. You can see them on video. And I was doing the horns down thing. So horns down, right? Horns down, go Dogs.